Hello and welcome to the Rotoworld Baseball Show. I'm your host, Eric Samulski, joined, as always, by my co-host, Scott Pianowski, on All-Star Week. We don't have any real MLB regular season games until Friday, but we've got the Home Run Derby, we've got the All-Star Game, we have the start of the MLB Draft, so there is still plenty of baseball goodness this week, Scott.
Yeah, there is. And, I like the All-Star break for like a couple of days. And then, come like Wednesday night, I'll be jonesing for box scores and, the regular routine that we have. So it's, I get why the players get a break till Friday. It probably makes sense. But I will miss baseball on Thursday. Also, do you remember when you were a kid? We're old enough, at least I'm old enough. I think this might cover you too. That when I was a kid, I'd watch the All-Star Game, and it would be my only chance to see certain guys. That's what Dave Winfield looks like, or has baseball card
for sure.
Or whatever. And growing up in Boston, Red Sox fan, back then the DH, of course, was only an American League thing, and I wanted the National League had a very long, dominant stretch, and I remember Fred Lynn hitting a grand slam off Atlee Hammaker in Comiskey Park. I mean, totally dating myself with that reference. And Lynn raising his fist as he ran around the bases, and the American League was finally breaking the streak. And I was like, yeah, American League, man. I used to hate the National League with their bunting and, the pitchers couldn't hit and all that stuff. And now it's like, I actually wish we had diversity in baseball. I think too much of it is the same, where teams play the same and everybody's got the universal DH. I would love to go back to have a team like the 85 St. Louis Cardinals that was all about speed. I wouldn't mind a few more turf stadiums. I get why they want to play on grass, and they should, but a couple of turf parks wouldn't bother me. I know they still have some, but it's just funny how the things that you maybe turned you off when you were a kid, now you're like, yeah, I wish we could go back to that.
Yeah, I think also I like interleague play, but it was fun to be like, oh, this pitcher is going to face this hitter for the first time in their careers because they don't see each other. And we'll get some of that. Like, it's cool that Paul Skeens gets to start, and some of the guys he faces will have never faced him before. That'll be pretty interesting. I would love to see how they do the NL All-Star team starting lineup. Just because I'm thinking about I guess it'd be William Contreras or Yelich, right? If Contreras or Yelich hit in the top 4, they might get to face Corbin Burns, who's going to start for the AL. And so that could be fun, getting to see Burns face Yelich in Burns's first year, in Baltimore. Those kind of little storylines are always fun, but the game itself, I'm not super intrigued by. You know what I would love to see this week when there's no baseball is the futures game. Would be great if that was on tonight or Tuesday instead of, last night, buried yesterday at 4:30 in the afternoon while there were other games going on.
Could they have even moved the draft to Monday or Wednesday? Is there a logistical reason why they couldn't do that and just dominate that day?
I have no idea. No,
I don't think. But
I don't think there's a logistical reason why. MLB seems to always want to shoot itself in the foot. The fact that you have a game like the Futures game that is designed to showcase the next level of talent in the league, and one of the biggest criticisms against you is how poorly you market your stars and the future stars of your league, and that game is just buried in the middle of actual regular season games. It just makes no sense to me. It seems like it's an active decision to make the worst possible decision. There's no logic to putting it where they had it.
No, it doesn't make sense, which is why we can at least celebrate Skeens starting for the National League is such a great call. He's one of the most exciting players in baseball, and he's somebody who a lot of people probably haven't seen yet. He plays for a team that is not in contention, and he's like a walking 6 or 7 inning no hitter. Nobody goes 9 anymore, but some days he's going to throw a no hitter. It's going to be backed up by 2 relievers. But Paul Skeens right now is about as much see TV as I guess after Shohei Ohtani, you could say right now Skeens is the most must see guy. I mean, Aaron Judge is there and stuff.
Yeah,
there's a lot of great players in baseball. It sucks that Acuna's hurt, but I would say after Ohtani, Skeens is probably the guy who gets my blood pumping the most right now.
For sure. And it'll be exciting to see him face off against, the guys in the AL that he'll see for probably his 1 inning of work. But that will be fun. So on today's show, we're going to do a little bit of the discussion on this weekend's waiver wire. Even though there aren't that many games for you in your fantasy leagues this week, there's still some guys that can be picked up or that were picked up that we should address. And then we're going to look at some of our first half takeaways. Our surprising teams, our surprising pitchers, hitters, disappointments, all that kind of stuff. So that will be the bulk of our show today. We'll do some quick news and notes at the top. There haven't been a lot of transactions over the weekend. Carlos Correa is going to go on the IL with plantar fasciitis. It's in the other foot from where he suffered this last year, and it is supposedly not nearly as significant as last year. They haven't given a firm timetable, but it's interesting to note when we're thinking about how this all plays out for the Twins is that Jose Miranda was placed on the IL with a back injury earlier in the week, but it was predated. So he can come back after missing one game after the All-Star break, and the Twins have hinted that his injury isn't very severe. So it's very likely Miranda is actually back this weekend. And then that means it would be logical that Miranda plays third, Brooks Lee plays short with Correa out, and you don't really see a major change with the Twins lineup. You still got Willie Castro at second, and it goes on and on and on. Now, if Miranda doesn't come back, then I think you might see some at-bats get shifted around for other people. But I don't know that there's anything really actionable here. And as good as Correa was playing, I think you have to hold him even in leagues without an IL spot.
Yeah, you definitely have to hold Correa. And to me, we talked about the takeaway to me is Brooks Lee. We talked about how he's such a good hitter. There's a lot of Legos on this team. Castro can play almost everywhere. Lee can play a couple different positions. That it's like one of those situations with a good starting pitcher. Well, they have 7 starters. Well, yeah, eventually somebody's going to get hurt. Somebody's going to need load management. Between the Twins being a platoon-heavy team and guys eventually needing maintenance, needing time off, and we've gotten through mostly a full Byron Buxton season. He's sitting about once a week, but they've kept him healthy, even though he's been playing the field. You just trust in the talent and trust that eventually a spot opens up. I never saw Lee as anybody who was in danger of losing playing time, because inevitably something like this would probably happen.
Yeah, and again, this shouldn't be that big of an issue with the Twins lineup, which has been good, and we'll talk about some players that have added some juice to it a little bit later on. Heston Kjerstad was placed on the 7-day concussion IL, so he might not miss any time. He was starting to push Cowser kind of into more firmly of a bench role. Cowser had only started 2 games against right-handed pitching this week prior to Kjerstad getting hit in the head in that Saturday game and having to be put on the IL. Kjerstad's only rostered in 38% of Yahoo leagues. This feels like a buying opportunity. We have seen some guys deal with concussions in the past. Anthony Rizzo, last year, Tyler Stevenson before, where the production does dip. And so I guess there's no guarantee that, he comes back and is hitting like he has been hitting, but he was starting to be the starting outfield. He was starting to push Cowser to the bench. And so I'm curious, I'm curious if you're interested in using this as a buying opportunity for Kjerstad, and B, I'm curious, if you think for baseball that this Orioles Yankees rivalry, which seems to be heating up, is a good thing. I mean, we don't love to see guys throw at each other. Obviously that part isn't good, but the blood is boiling here with the 2 top teams in the AL East. And it does make for really interesting viewing.
Oh, it's fantastic. And like you, I not only do not want to see guys thrown out, but certainly not at the head, right? I mean, it's just really scary,
Right.
Especially the velocity that guys bring. But these teams don't like each other. That's great. And albeit as a Red Sox fan, it's nice to see a different rivalry that isn't the Red Sox and the Yankees. I think everybody's seen that. And I'm happy the Red Sox are, a competitive, quasi-competitive team. I don't know what they're going to do at the deadline, but you have the Yankees, the old money. You have the Orioles, kind of the new kids on the block with all those great prospects and players in their mid-20s. And at some point, Henderson could be the MVP this year. Someday, Adley Rutschman's probably going to be an MVP. They have Jackson Holliday, who doesn't even have a spot yet. He's 20 years old, hottest prospect, probably batting prospect in the minor.
Right.
It's just, I love this ball. I wish I had more fantasy stake in it, but the Baltimore lineup is just so deep. We've talked about it all year. Almost everybody in the lineup is an OPS plus over league average or WRC plus, whatever you want to go on, measures your offensive ability. So I love that these teams don't hate each other. And also, we talk a lot, and I'm certainly one of these people who's like, baseball gets this wrong and baseball gets that wrong. I don't love the expanded playoffs, but what I do like is that at least they a few years ago shifted the model back to where winning the division means something. Because at one point they got to a format where winning the division meant almost nothing. And I love that this is what we're at the break. Baltimore's one game up on the Yankees, and any game that, like the way the Yankees lost on Sunday, right? And you talked about it, just it's a joke. Right. The game doesn't end on an error because Verdugo misplays the ball in left field. I have no idea why that can't be an error. It's a play that everybody should routinely make, but baseball never calls that an error. They never have, and it just official scoring is so broken in baseball, and it's just not fair to the pitchers. But be that as it may, if the Yankees lose this division by one game, they're going to point to a game like that, right? Where it's like
for sure
game away, and pennant races. We're never going to have the pennant races the way it used to be, where baseball playoffs were more exclusive. People want more playoffs. Baseball makes more money in the playoffs. I get all that. That toothpaste is never going back in the tube. But at least the current format incentivizes teams to win the division. And this looks like a division that's going to go down to the wire. I do think Baltimore's the better team. Maybe it's just an anti-Yankee guy talking there. Although the Yankees are shit. We talk all the time. Well, top heavy they are, right? They have two monsters.
And that's actually my question to you is like, yes, these are the second and third best teams by record in the AL right now. The Guardians share the same amount of wins as both the Orioles and the Yankees, but have fewer losses.
Right.
But it hasn't been great for the Orioles and Yankees of late. These teams are showing some cracks. They're showing some flaws. The Orioles, it's the depth of the pitching rotation, right? The Yankees, it's the depth of the lineup, like guys after Soto and Judge. Are these teams, we love the rivalry, we love the bad blood they're building because it is going to come down to the wire, but is it going to come down to the wire for just them? Like, do the Red Sox, who are only 4.5 games back of the Orioles, have a legitimate shot here? Are these actually the two best teams in the AL, or are there some weaknesses here that could be exploited by the Astros or the Guardians or even the Twins?
Well, I look around baseball. Who is a monster team? The Dodgers certainly have the potential to be that. The Phillies have had a great first half. A lot's been made of the schedule that they've played, although they've made that schedule look bad by beating a lot of those mediocre teams. Mm-hmm. But you talk about I thought Houston didn't have a great first half. They're only one game out in the NL and in the AL West. Seattle is in first place, but their offense is really full of holes. They have a bunch of guys hitting stuff. It's funny that Mario Mendoza was a Seattle Mariner, and it feels like half that lineup is hitting under 200, which is partly the shape of baseball. The Guardians are good. They're not unbeatable by any means. The Twins are looming. The Royals have had a surprise season. We'll talk about surprise teams later. It feels like baseball usually is top heavy, where there's like 3 or 4 really good teams, and then if you're in the middle, you might as well just sell. Now I feel like this is more of a go for it year. Where I look at the American League, it's like, why couldn't like 7 or 8 of these teams win the whole thing? Now, obviously the playoffs are short series and everything, so you think everybody has a chance, but why couldn't the Red Sox go to the World Series? Why couldn't the Royals get into the playoffs and go to the World Series? Why couldn't the Mariners, I know they're in first place right now, but why couldn't the Mariners, the only team in baseball, by a great trivia question, the only team in baseball that's never been to a World Series, why couldn't this be the Mariners year? I love how wide open it is, and it feels a little bit like a football season. I know that turns people off sometimes, but I think, and look, last year, Texas and Arizona was the World Series. I know that didn't move the needle. I know the networks want like Yankees, Dodgers, or Braves, Yankees, or something like that. But I don't know. I think it's been a really fun American League, and I love that everybody's got flaws, and that just makes the next few weeks with the trading deadline all the more interesting.
Yeah, and we will talk about the trade deadline on Wednesday's show. We're going to have DJ on, and we're going to talk about some of the trades we'd like to see. Some of the players who could change their fantasy value a lot. Are we going to see better second half fantasy value for Xander Bogaerts, who surprised both of us by already, beating the timeline actually on the injury for the fractured shoulder. He is already back off the IL and playing for the Padres. We thought it would definitely be after the All-Star break, if then. He's played in 2 games. He's gone 2 for 4 in each of those games against the Braves, 1 RBI total, so 4 of 8 with 1 RBI. Hit 4th the last game, hit 5th the day before, started at second base both games. Not hitting well overall on the year, hitting just 231 with 4 home runs and 4 steals. What are your second half expectations for Bogaerts?
They're pretty low because he was available in a couple of my leagues maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago for only the cost of an IL stash. And I actually had people who I preferred to stash than Bogaerts. You look at the trend of his career where he's not really a 20 home run guy anymore. He needs to be a batting average plus. He steals a little bit. He stole a little bit more with San Diego in his first season, just the shape of the team. The Red Sox generally have not been a running team, although it's changed a little bit this year. But I look at a guy who's going to be, I don't know, 265, 270 hitter over a full season, would hit like maybe 12 to 15 home runs, might steal 8 bases, won't have the best batting lineup real estate in San Diego. I think he's just a guy right now.
Yeah, and I know we talked about this on one of the shows before. It's like the 19 steals last year were a huge part of his fantasy value. Hitting 285 was great. The 83 runs were good. But the stolen bases were huge for him. Recovering from that fractured shoulder, the nature of diving head first when you slide, like I wonder how much they're going to let him run. Also with Luis Arias in town, like I don't see Bogaerts really moving up in the lineup much. Like it seems like Arias and Profar are pretty much locked into the 1-2 spots. And I know Profar has been struggling a little bit, but also like Jackson Merrill is also providing a really good case to be moved up in the lineup.
Mm-hmm.
So if Bogaerts is a fifth hitter for the Padres with, 20 homer power over the course of a full season, who might not run, but is going to hit like, 280, 270, 280 for you. Like I can see that as a deep league middle infield target because the lineup around him is solid, but it's not something that gets me overly excited. And I don't think you're going to get the level we saw last year.
Yeah, we've definitely lowered the expectations for Bogaerts reasonably so. And I'm with you, even though Merrill hasn't hit maybe much for the last 7 to 10 days, he deserves to move up in this lineup. He's one of my favorite emerging young players. And for all the justified criticism the Red Sox got for how they botched the whole Mookie Betts thing and they signed Chris Sale to an extension at the wrong time, not giving Bogaerts the 11-year, $280 million that the Padres did. That contract already looks bad. It's going to be an albatross in a couple of years.
Yeah, I agree on that. We did have a trade actually.
Mm-hmm.
We had a trade over the weekend, an interesting one too. The Royals traded for Nationals reliever Hunter Harvey. Hunter Harvey, who you gotta, give it up to the Nationals. I mean, Hunter Harvey was a waiver wire pickup for them over a year ago, and they turned him into, a good enough player that they got a really strong prospect in return. So it was Caden Wallace, who was a second-round pick for the Royals in the 2022 draft. He's currently in AA, hitting 282. He did have an oblique strain. He did have a broken rib this year. But he was the second best prospect in Kansas City's farm system, according to MLB Pipeline. And then the Royals also traded a compensatory first-round pick in this deal. That feels like a lot to give up if you're not going to hope that Hunter Harvey, who's under contract for next year as well, pushes to be a closer. Now, Harvey is only he has a 4.20 ERA this year, but the 2.99 Sierra seems to suggest things are better. But since Harvey's been with the Nationals, he's been really good. He has a 3.17 ERA over 145 innings with an almost 28% strikeout rate. He could push James McArthur for this closer role. I don't think he's going to get it right away, but I don't think you give up that much if you're the Royals, unless you want this guy to at least push for the job.
Yeah, I mean, the Royals bullpen has been a problem all year. I like that they're quote unquote going for it. It's going to be like a top 10, a bottom 10 bullpen. And James McArthur is certainly somebody who could at least use some help closing, or maybe Harvey could dislodge him. So the key with Harvey is just, as you outlined with the Sierra, his FIP is in the low 3s. Don't look at that ERA. You see an ERA over 4 for a reliever, and you immediately like, I don't want any part of this guy. But he's pitched a lot better than that. And I would have to say, if you're going to give up this much to get him, you would think he's at least going to get high leverage work, if not the 9th inning work. So he's probably the clubhouse favorite to be the saves leader in the second half of this for a probably playoff bound or playoff contending Royals team.
Yeah, and if you are in keeper league situations, I think that he could be the favorite next year as well. Again, we'll see how that all plays out. Last bit of news we should chat about is the Dodgers have said they're going to call up their top starting pitching prospect, River Ryan, after the break. River Ryan shot up to, I think, like 33rd overall on Keith Law's top 100 list this season. He didn't pitch in competitive games until the start of June because he was battling an injury. But he is somebody who prospect guys I know have been a fan of and are really excited by. Interesting to note that he has not thrown more than 75 pitches in a professional outing. I think that I'll double check this, but I believe his career high in innings in a start is 4. It doesn't strike me as somebody the Dodgers are going to call up for length. And then Dave Roberts also made a comment the other day that Clayton Kershaw, quote, could be an option after he makes one more rehab start. So what are you doing with the Dodgers rotation right now? You know, Glasnow is on the IL with lower back inflammation, but he might be back after a start or two. Is River Ryan worth picking up? Is he only going to throw 3 or 4 innings at a time? Is Kershaw actually going to come up and do the same thing 3 or 4 innings at a time? Like, what do we do with all this?
The easy answer to this is that I think the Glasnow thing was just, look, he's never thrown a ridiculous amount of innings. He's 120, I think, was his top before this year. He was going to zoom past that. So let's, load management. Let's not overextend him. We're already in the playoffs anyway. I still think Glasnow is going to be a major factor in the second half, and we'll only miss, maybe a small handful of starts. I wouldn't change my opinion of him or my rank of him. Ryan will have to pitch his way onto my team, and if people proactively add him before I do, and I don't get him, that's fine. I worry about the length. He doesn't have much of a resume to go on. I mean, he could be a good long-term prospect, but my short-term hopes are very modest. I don't know what to do with Kershaw because, again, all the Dodgers want is Clayton Kershaw to be useful in some role in October. That's all they care about. And the second half is going to be figuring out what that is. Is that as a 4-inning, 5-inning starter? Is that as a multi-inning reliever? Is that as a late-inning bullpen guy? It could be any of those things. Kershaw, I think Kershaw's hanging on. He wants to win that one more ring. I think the one ring he won was in the pandemic season, which, they still get size for rings for that, but everybody looks at that as like not a really authentic championship. It's just the season was so short, and it just the conditions were so different. It is what it is. I'm glad they played it, but it just doesn't feel the same. It doesn't probably savor the same. So I think Kershaw's just hanging around, and he wants to win that one more title. Although he's no longer the frontline guy anymore. He's a walk-in Hall of Famer, of course. I have some shares of guys like Kershaw. I have some shares of guys like Jacob deGrom, where if I get anything from them. If I got like 7 deGrom starts, I'd be thrilled. Right. If I got like 63 Kershaw innings, I'd be thrilled. I don't know what to expect from them. You can't, and I don't think your roster should have too many of those guys. I mean, I think like one of them makes sense. When you get a second one, you're just blocking your advancement to pick up guys that you can use right now who are much more stable assets. But I'd love to see, as a fan, Kershaw come back and do something. I'd really love to see deGrom. I think people forget just how dominant he was that last season with the Mets, where his whip was like, I think you talked about it last week, it was like 0.55 for half a season. He still got Cy Young votes. He only threw like 90 innings, but it's hard to know. These are very difficult guys to project for different reasons. deGrom's on a team that's going nowhere too. So I don't know if that maybe discourages him to pitch this season.
Yeah, I can't take any shares of Kershaw just because I think he's going to be like a 3 or 4 inning guy. Though I think we're seeing that is probably going to be the case with River Ryan as well. Like he just hasn't played enough. He hasn't pitched deep enough into games for us to believe that, he is going to like actively get that opportunity. Another domino here is that they moved Yamamoto to the 60-day IL. And Bill Plunkett, who is a Dodgers beat writer, mentioned that means that Yamamoto can't come back until I think it was August 16th, but he said he's not tracking to come back by then anyway. So that says to me that Yamamoto is probably more likely to come back like beginning of September. And I don't know that I can roster Yamamoto in that case.
That's totally reasonable. One of the things about Ryan, you worry about him going 3 or 4 innings. Not only are teams getting more comfortable with those types of pitchers, but nobody cares anymore. It used to be that if a pitcher had a lead, if a team was up like 6-1 and a pitcher started the 5th inning, they would let him basically tear his rotator cuff to get through the 5 innings to get the win. Nobody cares about that anymore. People will get, and then it used to be if somebody got pulled in the 5th inning in line for a win, he might get mad. He might, bark at the manager on the mound. He might throw his glove, whatever. Nobody does that anymore. It's all understood that when we think you're coming out, you're coming out. We don't care. Nobody manages by the win anymore. So that's all the more reason why if somebody you need to start guys who you think have a good chance to pitch 6 innings. It used to be, okay, I want somebody to go 7, 8, or 9. That's kind of out the window. 6 is the magic number for me, because at least if you leave with a lead after 6 innings, okay, you only have 3 innings for your bullpen to screw it up for you. And if you're pitching for the Cubs this year, they will screw it up for you. But we've seen that for Justin Steele all season. But it's just funny how now when they talk about somebody being a 3 or 4 inning guy, it's not like, oh, well, we'll see how he goes. If he's dealing through 4 innings, we'll keep him in. No, it doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't. There are some other news and notes we want to talk about, and then we'll get to our big discussions of the day. Nolan Jones is back on the IL with a back injury. So that is concerning, both in terms of, his lack of production, but also multiple back injuries in the same season. His teammate, German Marquez, is back from the IL. I don't know what type of fantasy value you're going to get from him, but just, he has been relevant outside of Coors in the past. He is back in that rotation now. Brian Wu came off the IL. Javier Assad came off the IL. And Joey Ortiz for the Brewers came off the IL as well. So a bunch of guys are getting healthy. Jeffrey Springs up to almost 80 pitches in his last outing for the Rays. The outing didn't go so well, but 80 pitches is good. Max Meyer threw 5 shutout innings for AAA Jacksonville. He had not thrown more than 4 innings in his first 10 AAA starts. He's thrown 6 and 5 his last 2, which might indicate the Marlins are getting close to calling him back up. But we said that a month ago when they said he'd be up soon. And it hasn't happened yet. We'll talk about some of the guys who are up and producing in our waiver wire section. But before we do that, the countdown is on to the Olympic Games. Watch the opening ceremony in Paris next Friday night and prepare for the best athletes in the world to compete for gold over the ensuing 2 weeks in France. We are here next Friday night. It's time to start the Olympics. So make sure you tune in on NBC and Peacock for that.
And let me duck in one interesting thing about that. I was reading Joe Posnanski today, who was talking about Djokovic getting soundly beaten in the Wimbledon final. And Joe was positing that he thinks Djokovic, like 24 majors, he's considered the best tennis player of all time. Mm-hmm. Hasn't won a gold medal. And it's a good surface for him. And I love how Djokovic just admitted, look, I was outplayed. Every shot I needed to make was my opponent made better. It's maybe Djokovic, who hasn't won a tournament this year and he's 0-3 against top 10 players. Can he get that gold medal in what might be his last Olympics? That's just one of the many storylines that I'm following. I'm also curious with injury on the women's USA basketball team, if Caitlin Clark winds up getting a spot on that roster. She was not put on the original roster, and I thought that was reasonable. This is obviously a very talented women's basketball team, but I wonder if she finds her way on that roster by the time France rolls around.
Yeah, be interesting to see, and we get to see all that on NBC and Peacock. Big pickup for the weekend was Rece Hinds. Got the most money in NFBC formats, highest bids in NFBC formats. We know what he has been doing for the Reds since being called up. This is a guy who was hitting .216 in AAA with a 38.4% strikeout rate. Scott, is this for real?
I mean, he was Calvin and Hobbes in the minors, and he's Roy Hobbs in the major leagues. It doesn't make any sense. I love Calvin and Hobbes, but he was, what do you do when somebody's production at the major league level is not at all congruent with the minor leagues. Now, the very convenient answer is it's a short sample and pitchers haven't seen him yet. Maybe they're challenging him a little bit too much, and that's going to go away. I did add him in a league just because we had the resources to do it. And what if it's like I don't want to just play the regression game. Of course, he's not going to hit 423 or slug,
Right.
Over 1,000. These numbers aren't real. They're only 7 games. That we know that he's not that. But I added him with the idea that what if he's like 15 homers in the second half? Good. What if he's like a 230 hitter with 15 home runs? Would I want that? Yeah, that would fit most of my roster. So I added it on the possibility, this plausible upside here, but there is with that minor league resume, there's absolutely no floor.
Yeah, there are a couple of guys we're going to talk about in a second that I was far more interested in adding as a bat in my leagues. I
know who one of those guys is going to be.
Yes, near 40% strikeout rate this year, 33% strikeout rate last year in a full season at AA. He hit 269 in that season at AA. This is a guy I just don't think the batting average is going to be there. And yeah, the power is legit, but like I know that all the Reds fans are making the jokes, the meme jokes on Twitter, but is this not, Aristides Aquino, like who had a huge stretch for the Reds, like was it 3 years ago?
Right.
With the Punisher, right? Ridiculous power, but he didn't make enough contact to last in the big leagues. And I kind of think that that's the line that Rece Hinds is walking here. And they're going to get TJ Friedel back at some point. Jake Fraley was on the bereavement list for much of last week, so he's now back in the mix. They have a lot of left-handed bats like Will Benson, guys like that. Where would it shock you if Hinds wound up being in a short side platoon, but then they also just traded for Austin Slater from the Giants, who has historically hit lefties really well. So then Hinds has to beat out Slater to be the top right-handed outfielder off the bench. So like, there are scenarios where in like 3 weeks, Hinds is just back in the minors. And so I saw putting low bids in, but I couldn't do anything substantial.
Yeah, I get it. I love you brought up Aquino, by the way. It's just fun when players, a player I haven't thought about in a long time. It's like when I watched that Yankees 1990 documentary, I'd forgotten about Kevin Moss. There's that one April that Chris Shelton was like the best power hitter in baseball. Like 9 home runs in a month. And, he's basically irrelevant like 6 weeks later, maybe a month later. I also can't mention the Reds without, to me, the Noelvi Marte to the bench or to the minors washes on, man. He just continues to strike out, not walk, not produce. And they have other good play. And I don't know if Hinds is necessarily one of them, but, they have other guys who are getting healthier and they have a decent depth of lineup. I'm afraid that Marte is not going to be a factor for this team in the second half.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, he has the talent to be. We just have to see some results on the field. One of the guys that I mentioned that I would rather pick up than Hinds, and I tweeted about it. It was Lawrence Butler.
Yep.
Lawrence Butler was one of 2 guys hit 3 home runs yesterday. Also, Michael Toglia did. My question to you is, do you believe in either one of them? Is either one of these guys somebody that we should be adding in, 12-team leagues? Are either one of these guys somebody who will make a difference for us in the second half of the year?
I'm feeling Butler. I mean, 9 homers, 6 steals. We liked him. I know you really liked him before the season. And this is a case of you have to ignore the season-long stats and look at where the trend is. And also he's percolated to the top of the lineup. The A's do not have a good lineup, but they have 3 or 4 guys, right? Brent Rooker, we'll talk about him a little bit later, is having a nice season. Zach Geloff has started to produce the last few weeks. Andahar has been at least around league average. They've had some moments from Baudet, whose OPS plus is over 100. So it's not 1 to 9 a good lineup, and the team after a competitive start for about 5 or 6 weeks has kind of sunk down to where we all thought they would be, is probably the second worst team in the American League this side of Chicago, but doesn't mean there isn't fantasy value here. I could see Butler easily ending the season with something like 20 home runs, 15, 18 stolen bases, and the rest of the year hitting like 260 or something totally playable.
Yeah, that's basically exactly where I'm at on him. DJ Short and I both predicted he would have a 2020 season to start the year, and that got off on a really poor foot. But this is a guy who's done really well the second time he's seen every level throughout his minor league career. And was already making some interesting change in terms of plate discipline at the big league level. It would not surprise me if he, at just 24 years old, was making incremental changes at the major league level as well. And I see no reason, again, you talked about where the Athletics are headed right now, why they wouldn't just play him the rest of the year. And even if he starts to slump, to see if he can figure his way out of this. Is he, the future in our lineup or not? I know he sits against lefties right now, and that's a situation where I'm also thinking, if he hits well enough, it behooves Oakland to say, okay, you've been hitting really well for like a month since you got called up. Like, let's start sprinkling you in versus lefties. Let's see if you can do this, because we need to see what type of player you are, for 2025. We need to see what type of player you are for a full season. Again, because what does it matter if we lose this game? What does it matter for your development right now if you're struggling versus lefties? Like, you're 24 years old, you're at the major league level. You have to. We need to know if you can do this or not. And that leads me to the next outfielder who was a big pickup, was Matt Wallner. And Matt Wallner, left-handed hitter for the Twins, who actually started versus two lefties. He has started every single game since he got called up. Wallner starting versus lefties for a very platoon-heavy team is interesting, because they have sat guys like Kirilloff and Larnach and Kepler in the past. And Wallner's getting that chance. He struggled when he first got sent down, but there's really great video of him on Twitter where people were talking about how he was overstriding in the majors, and so he was closing off his front side. And so a lot of what they were working on with him in the minors was stepping more directly back to the pitcher to open up that front side. And even though he started off slowly in the minor leagues, over his final month before getting called up, that was 21 games, he hit 360 with 8 home runs, 21 RBIs, 21 runs, and 3 steals in those 21 games. We know he makes ridiculously hard contact. Are you buying a second half bounce back from Matt Wallner?
It's possible. There's a lot of playable guys in this lineup. You like that he's getting a chance to play against all kinds of pitching, because we know they're a platoon heavy team. There's going to be strikeouts here, but at least, as you said, when the contact is made, it's loud. And I appreciate somebody willing to tinker with the swing and try mechanical things. As somebody who, when I can't sleep, I'm watching golf videos and trying to figure out what I'm doing wrong with, it's just crazy. One day you play great, and one day you play like you've never played before. There's so many moving parts to a golf swing or a baseball swing. So I'm open. There's plausible upside here. Again, there's no floor here, and he's going to strike out a fair amount of time. But I think he's more of like a 15-team league play, but I'm certainly interested.
Would you rather Matt Wallner or the next guy who is first base / outfield eligible, which is Juan Yepez? Yepez has become the starting first baseman for the Nationals since they sent Joey Meneses down. In 10 games with the Nationals, he is hitting 378, slugging 541, no home runs yet, but 6 runs scored, 3 RBIs, 1 steal, 16% strikeout rate, 14% walk rate. So that has been good. Is this another Cardinals outfielder who's going to go somewhere else and experience tremendous success?
Yeah, you stole my thunder. Like in fantasy football, where getting away from Adam Gase was the key to success, or we've seen it so many times that pitchers have left the Pirates and had better production elsewhere. Garrett Cole and Tyler Glasnow are just 2 of the examples. Charlie Morton, another guy we could point to, but the Cardinals, I don't know what it's been, because for a long time it was the Cardinals voodoo, and they, granted, they've had some guys with some surprises this year. We'll get to some of them later, and they're a better team than I expected. But I respect that they finally, pulled the plug on Meneses, and he wasn't good enough. And Yepez is one of these guys. He's 26, so he's not young. He's not a quote unquote prospect, but these guys kind of get lost in the shuffle sometimes. Why can't he be just a post interest guy who ends up being a plus offensive player? That's all I'm asking him to be. He's not going to be a superstar. Obviously, he's hitting over his head right now. But could he be an OPS plus, like 110 guy the rest of the season? He was 109 with the Cardinals in that extended run in 2022. Could he go back to being that guy? I think that's totally in play.
Yeah, he was hitting 263 in 74 games at AAA with 11 home runs. 14% strikeout rate, 12.5% walk rate there. That he does have a history, good on base percentage guy. He's been kind of like a 20 homer hitter, 25 homer hitter throughout his minor league career at the high end. So maybe he's a 20 homer bat at the major league level. But if you're a 20 homer bat who can hit 260, like, that has some value hitting near the middle of the lineup in an offense. And so, with that first base / outfield eligibility like that, there's corner infield eligibility there for like 15 team leagues. I lean towards Wallner because with these guys who are fringy, I would rather go for hey, if this clicks, who's going to give me the most value?
Sure.
And Wallner, I think, is going to give you the most value if things go well. I think Yepez is the safer bet because I think he's probably going to remain in that lineup for the rest of the year. And I don't think he face plants. I think his baseline of production is going to be a little bit safer, but maybe without the peak that Wallner could have. Another guy for the Guardians, we've seen a lot of like multi-position eligible guys come up for the Guardians, or the Guardians create them by moving them around all the time. Angel Martinez, who was one of their top 10 prospects within the organization, has been called up and started every single game this week, started in left field and center field. He was a shortstop in the minors, but it seems like he's kind of taken the starting center fielder job from Tyler Freeman. Martinez is a switch hitter, so he wouldn't necessarily need to be platooned. He's hitting 277 with 2 home runs in 13 games at the major league level. Was hitting 316 in 26 games in the minors, just 5 home runs and 2 steals. So there's not a lot of power or speed here. I mean, he has stolen, 10, 12 bases in the past, but he's not a burner. Are we going to get enough fantasy value out of Martinez to make him rosterable in a lot of leagues?
It's possible. And the key for me is, since they called him up, he's batted second every game. So he's right behind Juan, who's an on-base machine. He's right in front of Ramirez, who's, once again, MVP candidate. Naylor is locked into their cleanup spot. So that's the place for the extra at bat. That's the place for the run production. And there's a lot of Juan in his game too, as you talked about, because he's not a big power guy. He's not necessarily a big speed guy, but he's somebody who can be an efficient offensive player on a team. I was worried. One of the reasons I didn't want to draft Jose Ramirez is turned to be a horrible take, because I thought this lineup wouldn't be great. Mm-hmm. I thought it would be below average, and it's actually been really good all year. And the fact that they want to slot him second, because so many times these guys get called up, and the idea is, oh yeah, let's just bat them 7th, 8th, or 9th and put no pressure on them, whatever. Forget that. If you think somebody's good, just throw them in there and see what happens. Like the Nationals with James Wood, right? It's like none of this batting up 7th. Just put him in the middle of the lineup. Let him do his thing. Yeah. So the fact that Martinez is hitting second for me, that where I get to that fork in the road where I'm kind of like either or, yes or no, that tilts it in his favor. Again, 13, 14, 15 team leagues. It's below that. I think he's probably a little too fringy, but because they trust him and they're giving him that good lineup real estate, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt in the deeper formats.
Yeah, and runs and batting average, I think you pointed out. That's what the categories he'll help you in the most. Last hitter, and then we'll just get to one pitcher, but people are starting to add Eugenio Suarez because he's doing the thing that he does every year. We talked about second half splits and how sometimes they're not legitimate, but this is a guy who for his career has always been significantly better in the second half of the season for whatever reason. Higher ISOs, higher slugging percentage, higher batting average, more home runs, better strikeout rates, all of this stuff. Over the last 20 games, he's hitting 288, 4 home runs, 17 RBIs over that span, an OPS of 942. Yes, the strikeout rate is still 30%, but they went out and they got him this offseason. People are talking about, were they going to play somebody over him? But if he's starting to hit, he is going to stay in that lineup. Are we going to see another strong second half from Eugenio Suarez, where we're looking at double-digit home runs and decent RBI totals while hitting in the middle of a solid lineup?
It's one of those things where the second half player thing is not true in aggregate, but it can certainly be true in individual cases. And I think we've seen enough of it from Suarez. I always mention Alex Bregman, whose career always had that tilt to it. There's been players in the past who just couldn't hit in April because the weather was bad, whatever it was. I don't know what Suarez's excuse would be, because he's been playing in good climates. They play indoors in Arizona, or it's really warm, so that's not it's not a cold weather thing. But in one of my leagues, we actually did the walk of shame when we cut Suarez a few weeks ago, he's had this monster run on nobody's team. And finally, I just shrugged and I said, my partner wasn't thrilled when I cut Suarez because we hadn't talked about it beforehand.
Yeah.
I'm like, he's hitting 202. Nobody will pick him up. I mean, he doesn't run at all. He's just hurting our team. He's like, okay, fine. He kind of backed off. And I told him today, I said, I picked up your buddy Suarez again. So when he inevitably goes 3 for 52, it will be on our watch. But I think we've seen enough. I know a lot of people scoff at this, but we've seen enough of a history of him producing with this cadence to a season and he's hitting well right now. He probably hated to see the All-Star break come up because he's been sizzling for about 3 weeks now. Yeah, I'm going to believe in it enough that, my most important team, he's now back on our roster.
I've picked him up a few years in a row now in the second half or traded for him. It's worked out. I'll roll the dice again. Why not?
It's like your summer rental. You're going back to the same cottage every year. Yeah.
Why not? It's my weeks of the summer with Eugenio Suarez. Let's see it happen again. I'm not going to cover starting pitchers who were added this weekend because there was a weird, 3-day week in NFBC formats, and some of it is streaming and some of it is, not. I did want to just mention Ben Joyce, who's one of the most added relievers. Part of that was because he, threw a fastball 104.5 miles an hour last week. The other part is since he's added the sinker, he has really kind of reined in some of the command issues that were a real problem for him both earlier this season and last year when he had an over 8% walk rate in just 10 MLB innings. There's a very real chance Carlos Estevez gets traded at the deadline. And I think Ben Joyce was an ad because, hey, he's pitching really well right now, but also if Estevez is traded, I think you're looking at Ben Joyce as the closer for the second half of the year.
Yeah, I think it's totally plausible. That's what we're trying to do, right? To be a step ahead, to be proactive and not reactive to the closer market changes. And I get, look, some years the trading deadline is dud or the moves that are made don't have actionability to them. But we know whenever relievers are traded, that's where actionable moves come from, both the teams that add the reliever and the teams that subtract the reliever. So this is the type of move that good fantasy managers should be looking to sniff out now before it's obvious to everybody.
Yeah, and 3 weeks ago in my home league, I had a choice between him and Nate Pearson, and I added Nate Pearson, and it was the wrong decision. And it was, I was thinking, slightly better team. I thought that I thought Romano was done. I thought Garcia and Green were both likely trade candidates, and Pearson had been pitching well. And then right after I picked him up, they faced the Yankees and he got obliterated in 2 outings against the Yankees. And I don't know that they've used him in any sort of high leverage work since then. But Ben Joyce, if he's out there, I think it's a good pickup for most people. We're going to talk about our first half takeaways, our surprise teams and hitters and pitchers and all of that. But before we do that, we're in the final stages of the Tour de France. So find out who brings home the yellow jacket among the top cyclists in the world. You can stream the last few days of the most grueling race on the planet right now on Peacock. It goes until July 21st. So we have less than a week of the Tour de France, which you can check out on Peacock. It's the Tour de France is only slightly more grueling than a fantasy baseball season, Scott. It is a long season.
It is.
We're going to talk about some of our surprises. I just wanted your general takeaway from the first half in terms of fantasy. Like, has it been like a power outage thing for you? Has it been, the starting pitcher lack of depth or, or injuries or lack of innings and starts? Like what has been the main takeaway from you?
Yeah, I think it's the two things you mentioned, the offense being down and the pitcher injuries. But thankfully, those were seemingly more major stories early in the year. It seemed like in April, there was just this epidemic of everybody was hurt. I remember one time there were only 2 pitchers active in baseball who had won a Cy Young Award before because everybody else was either retired or hurt. And it was just, and one of them is Blake Snell, who's actually been terrible all year. But at least the offense has, and we always talk about weather getting warmer and everything, but at least the offense has made a nice comeback. We've seen some crooked numbers in July. That's favorable. And it seems like the pitcher health has started to even out a little bit. And a lot of people say, well, the injuries are going to happen in April, right? These guys aren't ready yet. It takes a while to ramp up. There's a certain cadence of the season that makes sense that why those injuries might happen early on. And we're still trying to learn about that. So even though those are the 2 major takeaways for me, and they've been frustrating, I do think they're both trending in the right direction.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. We have seen the offense tick up in the past. And I think, if you're starting to look at the pitchers who are at the top of the, the leaderboards in terms of like, um, who do you consider, if you ask people who they consider the top 10 pitchers, top 15 pitchers, whatever it is in the season, I think you're starting to see guys who, for the most part, and we'll talk about some exceptions, but for the most part, were guys who were like top 15, 20 guys in the past, right? Tarek Skubal, Zach Wheeler, Corbin Burns, Tyler Glasnow, Aaron Nola. I think nobody doubted Paul Skeens' ability. It was, was he going to get enough innings? Chris Sale has been that guy in the past. Justin Steele's been really good. Like, these are all guys who, we thought were going to be good. And other guys have worked their way in. And I think that it's been a good indication, both in terms of hitters and pitchers, of like taking your shot on the talent and not the role early on in the year is really important, in particular in shallow leagues where there will be options on the wire. Guys like, hey, Garrett Crochet, like, was he going to be a starting pitcher? We don't know. We knew he looked good as a reliever. We didn't know what he would be able to do in his first year as a starter. Okay, take a gamble. Paul Skeens, how many innings is he going to throw? I don't know, but we know that he's talented. So, like, maybe we should take a gamble. There are guys like that. Jack Flaherty, right? Jack Flaherty, he's been really good in the past. He was like a future ace, but he was injured, but he was getting a new shot. What's he going to do? I don't know. Take a gamble, right? Those are things we should have done. I'm happy that I drafted as many starting pitchers as I did, and I'm happy I filled out my bench with starting pitchers, because I haven't had to make many pitching moves over the year, and it's been tough. Like, I've been able to focus my resources on hitting, which I've found I needed to, because there aren't a lot of good hitting options on the wire. I feel like the hitting waiver wire has been a little bit barren this year, and I've needed to have those extra dollars to say, this might be a legitimate guy. I need to go pick up Brooks Lee or whatever it is.
I think this really comps really well to fantasy football. I'm not trying to force fantasy football down everybody's throat. By the way, fantasy football available right now on Yahoo Sports. Go draft the team today. In fantasy football, running backs, I like to get that one running back early. Just like I don't want my starting pitching staff to be all like speculative guys and pickup guys and late round guys. But so let's get an anchor, and then let's give ourselves opportunity to get lucky, because there's going to be much more impactful starting pitching that comes out of nowhere into a fantasy baseball season than there is fantasy hitting.
Mm-hmm.
Likewise, in fantasy football, any running back who gets promoted to a starting job, who all of a sudden has 10, 12, 15, 17 touches coming his way, has value. It doesn't even matter sometimes what their true skill level is. We're trying to figure out where the volume's going, and that leads to what a running back board will look like week to week. With receivers, you might be able to pick up, oh, this guy's a nice depth receiver for me. I'll play him in bye weeks, but you're not going to pick up. I mean, Puka Nacua was the generational exception last year, but your starters ideally for a fantasy football team are going to be the receivers you take early. Right. So, like, my typical fantasy football draft, first 4 rounds might be 1 running back, 3 receivers, because I want those receivers who start themselves. Fantasy baseball league, 5 rounds in, I'd like maybe 1 pitcher and 4 hitters. It's just interesting how those things comp, and how starting pitchers and fantasy football running backs are almost always the same type of discussion.
Yeah, it is an interesting thing. We talked about a little bit in the preseason, that analogy, and I really do think it works. We'll talk about some of the pitchers that we thought maybe came out of nowhere as the biggest surprises, but I want to get to teams first. I'll start. I thought the easy answer would be the Red Sox, because we're both Red Sox fans, but my surprise team of the year is actually the Milwaukee Brewers. 55-42, leading the NL Central. This was a team that we knew was going to be without Brandon Woodruff coming into the year. And then when they traded Corbin Burns, to me, it felt like a clear, hey, we're resetting, right? Craig Counsell was gone. We're resetting. We're gonna kind of like figure out how to make a run at it next year, 2 years, whatever. And they're in first place, and they look legitimate. They've gotten like really good production out of their pitchers by tailoring a plan to the starting rotation that they have. They have some interesting guys, and DL Hall has been starting to look a little better. Jacob Misiorowski in the minors, like they could call those guys up later. Who knows? But I'm surprised the Brewers are in contention right now. And not only in contention, but leading their division. That's one of the biggest surprises for me in the first half.
Yeah, I would have picked the Brewers too, but because you did, I'm just going to take a different team. The Kansas City Royals have not been to the playoffs since they won the World Series in 2015. They lost the World Series the previous year in 2014. They haven't had a winning record since then. They lost 106 games last year. They're 52-45. And we talked earlier about they just traded for a reliever. They're trying to get ready, get set for a playoff push. It's a top-heavy lineup. Bobby Witt is maybe the best or second best player in fantasy right now. Salvador Perez, I think, is a Hall of Fame player. Vinny Pasquantino is a good player. Michael Massey's healthy again. But the lineup isn't particularly deep. I would like to see them add one more hitter.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the bottom line. I thought one of the reasons why I thought the Tigers could be a surprise this year is I was like, well, I know the White Sox stink. I think the Royals are a few years away. I guess the Royals are ahead of schedule. Let's see how they look on the Pythagorean. They are they've basically earned what their record is. That they should be about what they are. So after you lose 106 games, it's not like they made any major moves in the offseason, right? I mean, 75 wins would have been a good season for this team. They're probably a year or two ahead of schedule, and they have a good chance of being a playoff team.
Yeah, they have probably the number one player in fantasy right now in Bobby Witt. Taking into account Acuna's injury. What about hitter? Let's go to hitter. Who is the most surprising hitter for you in the first half of the season?
Yeah, I mean, I saw your list. I don't want to repeat everybody you have, although I have to mention Jurickson Profar because I just thought his career was basically, going nowhere. Mm-hmm. Bryce Terang, part of that Brewer team you mentioned. Jaron Duran has taken a big step forward. David Hamilton doesn't always play, but he seems to want to run every time he does. And then a player we always knew was good, but if you knew this season was coming from this player, you could have drafted him everywhere because his ADP was so inexpensive. Marcell Ozuna. Who saw that coming, right? If I said, okay, I don't want you to draft any Braves this year. Oh, except Ozuna. Let everybody else go. Laugh at the Acuna guy and laugh at the, at the
Albies
Austin
guy,
Riley guy and the Albies guy and the Matt Olson guy, right? And please don't draft Spencer Strider either. Marcell Ozuna is going to crush everybody else in Atlanta. I don't think anybody saw that coming, but good for Profar. I looked at him as a prospect, as a post-site prospect, as a post-site prospect. And finally, I just admitted, okay, he's played too many positions. He's bounced around too much. He's been hurt. It's just not going to happen for him. And even when he started, I admit when he first started to produce, I'm just like, I've been, tricked by this before. I've fallen for this before. I'm not going to fall for it this year. Now I'm basically getting nothing out of it. I think he's on one of my teams, but I'm just happy for him.
Yeah, and Profar was on my list of honorable mentions along with Jaron Duran, Brenton Doyle as well, who has
terrific
really
season.
Up the batting average, having a great year. Brent Rooker is another guy I thought was going to be all power and nothing else, and hitting 290, and I think it's like a 940 OPS in the first half. Jordan Westberg, I thought was at risk of losing his job to Jackson Holiday or Kobe Mayo, and has proved that he is more than just a solid member of that lineup. My choice, there are only two hitters in the top 60 on the Fangraphs player rater in the first half of the year who were drafted outside of the top 350 picks. One of them is Jurickson Profar. The other is Alec Burleson, who had an ADP of like 570 coming into the year, is hitting 288 with 17 homers, 7 steals, 53 RBIs, 41 runs. He was an afterthought in the Cardinals outfield, and he is now an everyday player and a player who's playing really well. That's the biggest surprise to me, is I never would have even considered Alec Burleson even carving out regular at bats in that outfield with Lars Nootbaar and Jordan Walker, and maybe Tommy Edman's going to come back, and all of those guys, Victor Scott, all of this stuff. Like, it just didn't seem like there was any room for Alec Burleson, and he's been great.
And let's also give a shout out to Jackson Merrill, who was drafted pretty late and maybe headed for and we all knew he had an interesting future, but I don't know if anybody thought he was ready to go 2020, and that's in play for him this year.
Yeah, Jackson Merrill also been certainly a great one there. And also Jesse Winker, who's on the fringe here, who has vaulted back into relevance. It was tough for me to pick a surprise pitcher because there are so many guys that are like within the top 10 in value right now, like a Garrett Crochet or a Seth Lugo, who I never would have predicted would be that good. Luis Heel has been much better than I thought, but everybody was interested in Luis Heel in terms of his underlying skill set. For me, the biggest surprise has to be Ronel Blanco, because I legitimately had no idea who he was when spring training began. When he made his first few starts, I would have been the first person to tell you it was a fluke. It was nothing was going to happen. You know, a guy going from somebody I couldn't even have told you who he was to somebody who is a legitimate fantasy pitcher who should be in your lineup against pretty much any offense right now. I think to me, that's the biggest surprise of the first half.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Some of the names I have down: Cutter Crawford and Tanner Houck. I think Crawford became a little bit trendy maybe in the late part of draft season. We know Andrew Bailey's doing a really good job with that pitching staff, but a lot of the Red Sox have outkicked their ADPs. Ronaldo Lopez, I don't know how he's doing it for the Braves. He's been fantastic. Ranger Suarez, at a time where the wind is percolating away from starting pitchers, it seems like he's going to win 20 games. And I got to give it up for Chris Sale and Jack Flaherty. I thought Sale would probably he'd probably have one of those Glasnow seasons, right? Where he'd probably throw like 105 good innings, but it would be frustrating. And he's held up really well. And Flaherty, when you watch Flaherty, he just dominates, man. He hasn't had great luck with that defense, and he's had some games where maybe he should have won that he didn't. But he is if he would pitch a little bit deeper in games, I think he'd be striking out 200 guys. He may push for that anyway. We'll see if they're in contention late in the season or if he gets shut down or not. But it's just great to see pitchers like Sale and Flaherty. I thought they were done being dominant. I thought they were just later round. Hope you get anything out of them. If you even get 90, 100 innings, you've done well. And they've basically done that in the first half.
Yeah. Awesome. You know, even when I was in on Chris Sale, I didn't expect anything close to this. We'll go to some disappointments. Who's your most disappointing hitter of the first half of the season?
It's just so many of the Braves you can mention. And I don't want to pick on guys who are hurt, so I don't hold it against Acuna, but we talked about just everybody short of Ozuna coming in under expectations. Corbin Carroll has actually been really productive the last few days and has hit a couple balls out of the park, which is encouraging because we were worried about the shoulder, and he's still run, but he's not hitting for a good average. He's not hitting for power. He's been one of the wrong answers of the first round. Julio Rodriguez has been, people write to me and say, I can trade for Julio Rodriguez at a pretty reasonable cost. Should I do it? I don't know what to say because I'm not really sure who Julio is right now. I think his second half trend might be better than his first half trend. So maybe there's something to that, but Seattle lineup, despite that lineup, they're in first place in that division, but it's not a fun team to watch sometimes. And he's not the most disappointing guy, but if you ask Yankee fans who are you most frustrated with, and you can't say Aaron Boone or Brian Cashman, they're probably going to say Gleyber Torres. So we'll stick him on this list too.
Yeah, Gleyber Torres for me. Nolan Jones, we talked about him battling the back injuries, so he was on there for me, but I don't want to really ding him too much. Parker Meadows just got hurt, but he was a disappointment before. I mean, I had predicted him as this year's Josh Lowe, and he did not deliver early on. And James Outman, had James Outman on a few teams. And again, these aren't guys you're drafting high, but these were guys that I was excited about as kind of like, I'm going to take them relatively late-ish, and I'm going to get good production out of them. And I got nothing. The most disappointing hitter to me is somebody who I don't have on any rosters, because I was fading him at his cost, but I never would have projected that Bo Bichette would be the 521st ranked player in the first half of the season. And now I understand that some of that is, he's had a calf injury and he's only played 79 games, but I mean, he's hitting 221. He has 4 home runs. That's with 5 steals, which is what he had all of last season. So he's not even like running less. His speed is actually up. Just a 4.5% barrel rate. The pull rate is down to almost his lowest. It's still not pulling the ball at all. The ground ball rate is almost 47%. He just needs such an approach change. He's been, I almost can't think about dropping him in leagues because I think the talent is very clearly there as a guy who could hit 290 with 20 home runs over a full season. But like, I guess I'm describing Xander Bogaerts to you, right? Like, aren't I describing what a healthy Xander Bogaerts would do if like Bichette also but Bogaerts might even run more than Bichette. They're both like 20 homer hitters, and they're they both could theoretically be batting average guys, but they're both not playing well right now. Like I don't know. Maybe I'd rather have Bogaerts over the second half of the year than Bichette because the lineup is better. But it's just been such a disappointment for somebody who I think was being drafted like in the first 3 rounds of like 15-team leagues.
Yeah, that's a really good call. I think he obviously needs a change of scenery. Bichette does. One other guy who I didn't have in mind when I was making this list, in part because it's a logical reason why we haven't thought about this player in a while. But there was a player, first overall pick in his draft class, who hit 31 home runs last year. Here we go, ready to be a star. And Spencer Torkelson hit 201. He hit 4 home runs in 54 games, and he gets sent obviously to the minors. And so there's a Detroit area poker room that I go to, and a lot of the people who work at this facility, they're allowed to wear, Tiger stuff or Red Wing stuff, whatever. And one of the poker hosts has a Torkelson jersey that he wears. And I'm like, are you wearing that ironically?
Yeah.
Is your Kirk Gibson jersey in the wash, or, or you don't have a Riley Green jersey yet? And what's going on here? And Riley Green's been a really nice story this year. It's just finally kind of putting it together. I'd love to see that team just even get to 500. I think it's a fun team. I hate watching Javi Baez play every day. Talk about a contract that was terrible the day it was signed. But I had some Torkelson. I just thought, okay, the average won't be there, but he's going to hit 35 home runs. And apparently he's going to hit 4.
Yeah. I thought the home run power was more like, 25 or 30 because of the batting average issues. But I'm surprised that he has performed this poorly. I've been off on him almost all year. I know every time he hit a home run, people said, "By now, here comes the hot streak." And I think it could happen in the second half of the year. I'm not saying he can't come up and over the last 6 weeks of the year wind up hitting a bunch of home runs.
Oh, not doing much in the minors. In 34 games, 230,
and
237, 344, 393. He's slugging 393 with 5 home runs. I mean, he's not forcing his way back into the conversation.
He's not. There are issues. There are things within that swing and approach that need to get ironed out. I don't think it's a given. Striking out over 30% of the time in 34 games at AAA right now. That's not.
It's a shame
what you want to see.
He's a good kid. I like him. I hate to see him struggling like this, and it's been such bad luck. Again, I'm parroting Posnanski. How the Orioles seem to have the first overall pick so many years when there was like an Adley Rutschman waiting to be taken. And when the Tigers had the first overall pick, Spencer Torkelson was the guy. I mean,
he was the most MLB ready hitter that had come around in forever. And it just it hasn't worked out. And it's unfortunate. He's only 24. Maybe it works out eventually. We've seen guys kind of a switch flips. Words are hard. A switch flips and they figure some things out. Let's end with our most disappointing pitcher. Who is your pick for most disappointing pitcher of the year?
Yeah, I didn't want to include anybody.
First half of the first half.
I didn't want to include anybody who got hurt, so Spencer Strider won't be on this list. Although Blake Snell has been hurt part of the season, but when he's been healthy, he's been awful. I actually wouldn't blame anybody who wanted to cut.
The last 2 starts, though, have gotten better. And I feel like
I don't believe it. He's a game of 3 card Monty, man. You think you know where the card is, and you're going to guess wrong. The shell game with Blake Snell, who never completed a start in his career. He's at the 2 Cy Young Awards. I don't think he has a Cy Young vote in any other season. It's just a weird career. And I'm going to say until the cows come home that Pablo Lopez is better than this, and he's a buy, and that ERA over 5 is not supported by any of the component stats. But we play 5x5. ERA is a stat. ERA is over 5. That's certainly been disappointing for 3 months.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm not wanting to highlight guys who struggle due to injury. I did have a bunch of Joe Musgrove shares. I think that Bobby Miller is still injured. He has been a huge disappointment, and I'm gonna just blame the poor results on something tracking with injury. The velocity hasn't been there. Walker Buehler has been a huge disappointment.
Man, terrible.
But we weren't really in on him to start. For me personally,
it was weird though. You know what though? The day I cut Walker Buehler was just strange. Like, I'm cutting Walker Buehler. I'm really doing this, and he's just sitting on my waiver wires. Like nobody else wants him either.
I know. And maybe when he gets healthy, he'll go on a little bit of a stretch.
He's not healthy.
At the end of the
year,
year,
obviously not healthy. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. For me personally, biggest disappointments. I took a lot of shares of Michael Kopech once it was announced he was going to the bullpen. I thought that he would emerge as like a really good reliever. He's shown flashes, but it has been disappointing. I've cut him in a lot of places. I made that preseason prediction about Matt Manning. Not only has he not looked good at the major league level, he has not looked good at the AAA level. He has real problems against left-handed hitting. That was a huge miss. And my most rostered pitcher coming into the year, I had one more share of DL Hall than I had of Shota Imanaga and Jared Jones, making DL Hall my most rostered pitcher coming into the season. That was disastrous for 4 starts. I will say he has looked better in AAA, pitching to a 2.30 ERA in AAA. As he's started to build back up, the velocity seems to be coming back up after dealing with this knee injury. I'm going to get hurt again, Scott, because when DL Hall gets a shot again over the summer, I'm going to jump back in, because eventually I think it's going to happen for him. Maybe it's next year, who knows? But I was so ungodly excited about him. Sammy, my buddy Sammy, who used to host the Catcher's Corner with me, will tell you he dropped DL Hall. Like, we did a draft, and after one start, he dropped DL Hall and picked up Jack Flaherty, and I said, "You're going to regret that." And he didn't. He obviously did not regret dropping DL Hall for Jack Flaherty. It was a tremendous move by him. But I was so much a believer in DL Hall, and it's been a huge disappointment for me this year.
I'm going to throw in just a couple of bonus guys. Disappointments. I know he's been hurt part of the season, but Jordan Montgomery having an ERA over 6 and a whip of almost 1.7. Somehow he's cobbled 6 wins out of that. But it's just funny how he and Snell didn't sign for such a long time, and then they pitched poorly. They've been hurt. For all the Red Sox who have been really good, and I realize Brian Bayo had a really good start recently where he struck out a bunch of Oakland guys. His strikeout numbers are good, but his ERA is over 5. His whip is 1.47. And in a couple of leagues, I started to admit, like, I look at him as one of the guys I could trust. I actually can't trust Bayo, and I cut him right before that big strikeout game. I can live with that. It's not that interesting to me to talk about. When we look at the Yahoo MVPs, you'll see a lot of the right answers are just closers who weren't closing before the season. Kirby Yates, guys like that. So, okay, that's fine. If you can find saves on the cheap, you go do it. But one of the speculative save picks you could have made just because of the talent was Mason Miller. Just like, this guy's just too good. He's going to have a significant role. I know the team stinks. So what? 15 saves, 70 strikeouts, and 39 and 2/3 innings. So he's actually pushing you in strikeouts from a relief role, 2.27 ERA, whip is 0.86. He throws a little bit too hard. It makes me nervous that, something bad's going to happen to him down the road, and we'll see if Oakland can keep him or not. But anytime he comes into a game, I just love watching him pitch, and I wish he was on more of my rosters. I think, again, it's not just the Kirby Yates stuff. We get it, okay? There's been Leclerc wasn't good. Yates was around. They passed over Robertson, fine. With Mason Miller, you could have gotten to him from an emerging talent standpoint, and you could have made him a proactive pick, no matter what his role would be. Even if you wiped out his saves, the rest of his stats would make him fantasy viable.
Yeah, I've got a few shares, and I'm super – again, that's why I thought Kopech would be Mason Miller light, and that hasn't quite happened. But it's a lot of fun seeing these guys emerge. We're going to talk about the trade deadline on the next episode. That's also going to be fun, just kind of speculating on who will be traded, but also guys we would just like to see. Like, we'll each give a hypothetical trade or two that we just want to see happen for the sake of either fun or baseball or whatever. Check out the Home Run Derby tonight. Also, Wednesday morning, on NBC Sports, I will be dropping my top 100 starting pitchers list. I did it in the preseason. I wound up updating it up to like 150 before the start of the year, and I just thought there's absolutely no way I can do this during the year. So the All-Star break is giving me a chance to kind of re-up that. So check that out over on NBC Sports on Wednesday. You can follow me on Twitter at SamskyNYC. You can follow Scott on Twitter at Scott_Pianowski. I'll be back on Wednesday with DJ to talk trade deadline.